Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
"18-year-old Desiree Ferris had her whole life ahead of her, filled with dreams of becoming a model and a future her family hoped would include a career as a teacher. She was the youngest of 4 siblings and grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City, Missouri, where she was known for her beautiful smile and the ability to light up any room she walked into. Her family described her as feisty, outgoing, and full of life, a typical teenager with big dreams. On May 1st, 2017, Desiree's mother, Patty Tam, suspected her daughters were planning a surprise party for her birthday. That morning, Desiree and her sister left the house, leaving behind a birthday card on Patty's pillow. Her mother assumed she would be back that evening since Desiree and her sister had also bought ingredients to bake a cake. But as the day stretched on and Patty returned from work at 5 p.m., there was no sign of Desiree. Initially, there was little cause for concern. Desiree was still sending messages to her mother, confirming that she planned on coming home. She was always good about staying in contact and would never go anywhere without at least texting or calling. But as the sun set and night fell, Patty noticed something strange. Desiree's phone suddenly stopped responding. Calls went unanswered, messages weren't read, and even her social media accounts, which she was always active on, went silent. When Desiree didn't return home, Patty's worry turned into dread. She woke up in the middle of the night, hoping to hear from her daughter, but the silence was deafening. The next morning, on May 2nd, she filed a missing person report with the Liberty Police Department. Desiree's stepmother, Jennifer Ferris, first learned that Desiree was missing through social media. She had seen a missing person flyer posted online and started receiving texts and calls from people asking if it was true. Initially, she hoped, like many parents would, that it was all a misunderstanding, that maybe Desiree had just gone off somewhere and would return in a few days. But as Jennifer started digging, it became clear that something was very wrong. She accessed Desiree's phone records, checking her last known messages and tracking her phone's pings. Everything seemed normal until 4 a.m. on May 2nd, when all activity stopped. Her phone was turned off, her social media went dark, and all communication ceased completely. Determined to retrace Desiree's steps, Jennifer and other family members began piecing together the final hours before her disappearance. Desiree had spent May 1st with her sister and 2 men. Around 5 to 6 p.m., her sister was dropped off back home in Liberty, Missouri, but Desiree stayed behind in Kansas City. This raised immediate red flags for Patty, who recognized the names of the men she had been with. She had never met them personally, but she had heard of them before and had already warned her daughters to stay away. She knew they were trouble, and now Desiree was missing after being last seen with them. Investigators quickly honed in on the 2 men, tracking Desiree's phone records to determine her last known location. Her phone had last pinged in Marlboro Heights, a high-crime neighborhood in South Kansas City. Her texts had continued even after she was dropped off there. She had been messaging people and even video chatting with someone, appearing perfectly fine. But by 4:11 a.m. on May 2nd, her phone suddenly went silent. No more calls, no more texts, no social media activity. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. With police slow to act, Desiree's family took matters into their own hands. Patty and Jennifer agreed from the start that they would work together to find Desiree, no matter what. They began canvassing the neighborhood where her phone last pinged, knocking on doors, asking people if they had seen her or heard anything. It didn't matter that they were walking into a dangerous area. They were determined to find answers. Their persistence led them directly to one of the men Desiree had been with that night. Confronting him face to face, Jennifer demanded to know what had happened to Desiree. His story was that after dropping off Desiree's sister, he and Desiree had sat in a parking lot in South Kansas City before eventually heading to his house. According to him, at around 2 or 2:30 a.m., Desiree left in a white or silver truck. He claimed another man, the second person she had been with that day, had picked her up and was the last person to see her. But that man had already been arrested and sent to federal prison just 10 days after Desiree disappeared. To this day, he refuses to speak to police about her case. Desiree's family refused to give up, and as days turned to weeks, they continued their search. They built a Facebook group dedicated to spreading awareness and kept searching different addresses connected to the two men. They knew the people involved were dangerous criminals, but they also knew that someone had to have seen something. They just needed one person to come forward. Despite their efforts, the case remained stagnant. The Liberty Police Department classified it as an active investigation but has not disclosed any new leads. Investigators believe that the people who were last seen with Desiree know what happened to her, but fear keeps them from speaking out. Somebody saw something. Somebody knows something, Jennifer said. The theories surrounding what may have happened to Desiree are deeply disturbing. Some of the rumors and accounts that have surfaced are too horrific for her mother to believe. But regardless of what happened, the family is determined to find the truth. If it's my last breath on this earth, Patty vowed, I'm bringing my child home. Desiree Ferris has been missing since May 2, 2017, and the search for her continues. Whether she walks through the front door one day or her family has to carry her home, her mother and stepmother refuse to stop looking. They believe someone out there knows what happened, and they're pleading for anyone with information to come forward. If you have any details about Desiree's disappearance, please contact the Liberty Police Department. No mother should have to live with unanswered questions, and Desiree's family is desperate for closure. Until then, they will never stop searching. Jaru and his wife, Patricia, were last seen in Clayton, Missouri, on June 11, 1975. Their 17-year-old daughter, Joanne, stated that her parents had left that morning to attend a funeral. Jack allegedly took a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver with him. The couple entered an unidentified large green limousine or Cadillac and never returned. Before leaving, Jack promised to call Joanne to give her a telephone number where they could be reached in case of emergency, but neither of them was ever heard from again. Their son reported them missing on June 17th after he went to their home to celebrate Father's Day and found no one there. He had been unable to reach them by phone for several days. Upon arriving, he discovered their dog left in the backyard without food or water. All of Jack and Patricia's belongings, including their vehicles, toothbrushes, and 2 uncashed paychecks, were left behind. The garage and windows were unlocked. Joanne mentioned that she had argued with her father the night before they disappeared. He disapproved of her boyfriends and her drug use and had told her to move out the next day. On June 12th, she packed her belongings and went to stay with her sister, later relocating to her brother's home in Minnesota. All of the couple's relatives took polygraph tests. Joanne's results were inconclusive, possibly due to her emotional state. Authorities also believe she might have been under the influence of drugs on June 11th, which could have affected the accuracy of her memory of that morning. Investigators discovered that a car matching Joanne's description of the one her parents got into was indeed on the street that morning, but it had been there to pick up a neighbor. This led to further uncertainty about what had actually transpired that day. Patricia held a degree from Webster College and was a mathematics teacher in the Rockwood School District at the time of her disappearance. Jack was employed as a tool and die maker. Both were considered responsible individuals, and it was entirely out of character for them to miss work without notifying their employers. Before their disappearance, they had purchased 10 acres of land and had plans to build their retirement home on the property. By the time they vanished, only Joanne was still living with them, as their other children had already moved out. Authorities suspect foul play in Patricia and Jack's cases, which remain unsolved to this day. The circumstances surrounding their disappearance continue to baffle investigators, and their family still searches for answers. Thomas Fleming was last seen on June 16, 2016, when he spoke to family members at his mother's home on Country Club Lane in Glendale, Missouri, at approximately 11 o'clock a.m. After the visit, he drove away in his silver 2007 Nissan Versa, which had a Missouri license plate number FC1J3T and a distinctive red panda sticker on the back windshield. He has never been heard from again. 12 days later, on June 28, 2016, his car was discovered abandoned next to a coal plant in Gosage, Illinois, near the eastern bank of the Mississippi River. The vehicle appeared undisturbed, with no signs that it had been searched through, and there was no evidence of foul play at the scene. A worker from a nearby facility reported seeing the car coming and going in the days following Fleming's disappearance, before it was eventually left in its final location. At the time of his disappearance, Fleming lived with his wife in an apartment complex on Old Bend Road in Kirkwood, Missouri. He was a graduate of the University of Notre Dame and worked as an accountant. Investigators later learned that the State Board of Accountancy had sent him a registered letter, which was signed for at 11:16 a.m. on the same day he went missing. Given that his mother's home was only a few minutes away from his apartment, he would have had time to return home and sign for the letter. However, an attorney for the Board of Accountancy doubted that the signature was actually his. One of the most concerning aspects of Fleming's disappearance was that he left behind his diabetes medication, which he relied on for his health. Furthermore, he has not used his credit cards or accessed his bank accounts since he vanished. Despite the peculiar circumstances, police have not found any definitive evidence of suicide or foul play. His case remains unsolved, and the Kirkwood Police Department continues to investigate. Christian Ferguson was last seen by his father, Dewan T. Ferguson, in St. Louis, Missouri, on June 11, 2003. Between 6 o'clock and 6:30 a.m., Dewan called the police to report that someone had stolen his 1999 Ford Expedition SUV. He claimed that he had exited the vehicle, leaving the keys in the ignition, to place a phone call to Christian's doctor from a payphone at the intersection of Skinker and Page. Dewan stated that he had been driving Christian to the hospital at the time, and the boy was in the back seat when the car was stolen. The SUV was discovered 2 hours later, at 8 o'clock a.m., abandoned in a cul-de-sac at the dead end of Rombar Lane near railroad tracks in Ferguson, Missouri, about 5 miles from where it had allegedly been stolen. Strangely, the vehicle contained numerous valuable items, including a laptop computer, a camera, 2 cell phones, and other electronic gear, all left untouched. The keys were still in the ignition. However, Christian was gone. Police searched the area with tracker dogs, but found no trace of him. Given his physical condition, Christian likely wouldn't have been able to exit the vehicle on his own. Authorities immediately found inconsistencies in Dewan's story. He refused to take a polygraph test and stopped cooperating with police early in the investigation. Instead, he hired private investigators. Within 2 weeks of Christian's disappearance, Dewan and his family moved out of their rental home, taking many belongings with them. Police searched the home twice and found evidence raising concerns about Christian's well-being, including urine-stained clothing and bedding. Christian's mattress had a large liquid stain that had seeped through to the floor. Dewan, who worked as a bounty hunter in 2003, had a cell phone with him the morning of June 11th, making it unclear why he needed to use a payphone. A local man who routinely passed the payphone at that location testified that he saw a black man using the phone around 6 a.m. but did not see an SUV nearby. When shown a photo lineup, he identified Dewan as the man he had seen. Christian's mother, Theda, had married Dewan in February 1994, just 4 months after Christian was born. They later had another child, Lynn, who was transgender and was initially referred to in case documents as Christian's brother, Connor. Theda and Dewan separated in 1997, and their marriage was annulled a year later. They became embroiled in a bitter custody battle, accusing each other of neglecting Christian's medical needs. Ultimately, Dewan won full custody of both children in 1999, and Theda was ordered to pay child support. Despite the custody ruling, Theda filed multiple complaints against Dewan, alleging abuse and neglect. Over time, their relationship improved slightly, and Dewan allowed Theda more access to the children. Christian suffered from citrullinemia, a metabolic disorder requiring constant medical attention, but Dewan frequently missed his medical appointments and was inconsistent with his medications. Christian was hospitalized at least twice due to this negligence. In 2000, Dewan falsely claimed that a pharmacy had run out of Christian's medication, which later turned out to be untrue. Christian's nurses often noted that Dewan failed to refill his prescriptions on time, and two of them resorted to purchasing the medication themselves. They also reported signs of neglect. Christian was often unfed, left in unchanged diapers, and ignored by his stepmother, Monica. The situation worsened after March 2003, when Missouri discontinued Christian's home health care benefits because Dewan had failed to enroll him in school. After that, Christian's nurses were no longer present to oversee his care. Investigators later found multiple bottles of Christian's prescribed medications, unopened and full, indicating he had likely been undermedicated for months. The last time any of his prescriptions were filled was in late April 2003, 6 weeks before he vanished, and the medicine was never picked up. Theda was actively fighting for custody at the time of Christian's disappearance. A judge had restricted her visits to a specific schedule, but Dewan repeatedly missed them. The last time Theda saw Christian and Lynn was in March 2003, shortly after their home health care ended. She noticed Christian was dirty, had lost weight, and was suffering from a severe diaper rash. He smelled of ammonia and displayed symptoms of a citrullinemia episode. She immediately took him to the hospital, but after his release, Dewan picked him up, and Theda never saw him again. In April 2003, Theda once again filed for custody. 2 days before Christian disappeared, on June 9th, a judge ordered Dewan to comply with the visitation schedule or risk being held in contempt of court. Their next scheduled visit was set for June 14th, but by then, Christian was gone. Christian's younger sibling, Lynn, later provided critical testimony. Lynn stated that on the morning of June 11th, while it was still dark outside, Dewan entered their bedroom, wrapped Christian in a blanket, and carried him out of the house. Lynn's teenage stepsister corroborated this, saying she saw Dewan leave around 4 a.m. Additionally, Lynn recalled that 2 days before Christian disappeared, his gastric feeding tube was missing. Investigators found the tube in the Ferguson residence. It was covered in bodily fluids, showed tool marks, and appeared to have been forcibly removed. Lynn also testified that Christian appeared severely malnourished and was moaning in pain in the days leading up to his disappearance. When Lynn brought this to Monica's attention, she dismissed it and warned them to stay away from Christian. Lynn later checked on Christian and found him unresponsive, his eyes rolled back in his head. In 2004, Dewan and Monica were indicted on federal fraud charges for using a false Social Security number on a car loan and forging Dewan's grandmother's signature. Dewan pleaded guilty, served 8 months in prison, and was released. Monica avoided jail time through a pretrial diversion program. Authorities believe that between March and June 2003, Dewan deliberately withheld medical care from Christian, leading to his death. They suspect Christian died on the night of June 10th, and Dewan staged the car theft to cover it up. However, it wasn't until October 2019, 16 years later, that Dewan was finally charged with his son's murder. At his 2022 trial, Lynn testified against him, recounting years of neglect and abuse. Lynn stated that on the night of June 10th, Dewan took Christian into another room, where sounds of struggle were heard. Christian's moans grew louder, then suddenly stopped. Monica was seen crying in the doorway. Shortly after, Dewan returned, wrapped Christian in a comforter, carried him out, and left the house. A former acquaintance of Dewan also testified, stating that he had confessed Christian was already dead when he called 911. He allegedly told her that Christian's body was buried in the foundation of a house under construction. Fearing for her safety, she quit her job and moved out of state to escape him. Home health care workers also testified, describing Christian's deplorable living conditions. They recounted instances of him being tied to a bed for hours, left unchanged for days, and suffering extreme neglect. Despite his defense attorney arguing that the prosecution had not proven its case, Dewan was convicted of first-degree murder in July 2022. He received a mandatory life sentence without parole. Christian Ferguson remains missing, but authorities strongly suspect foul play. Anyone with information is encouraged to contact the St. Louis Police Department. Elizabeth Gill was last seen in the front yard of her home in the 300 block of South Lorimer Street in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, at 4 p.m. on June 13, 1965. She was carrying a small pail of sand at the time of her disappearance and has never been heard from again. An extensive search of the area turned up no sign of her. Initially, authorities believe she may have wandered away from home and fallen into the Mississippi River, which was located a few blocks away. However, this theory was eventually dismissed, as she would have had to cross streets and railroad tracks and descend a bluff to reach the water's edge. In 1970, Philip Odell Clark, a Missouri man serving a life sentence for murder, claimed he had accidentally run over Elizabeth with his car on the day she vanished. He said he panicked, buried her body, and kept silent because he had been drinking and feared being charged with her death. Investigators looked into Clark's confession, but found no evidence to support his story. He had also murdered his ex-wife's grandmother in 1966 and held 5 other people hostage. Over the years, Clark gave conflicting accounts about the location of Elizabeth's body, and in 1971, he was convicted of manslaughter for killing a fellow inmate. He himself was murdered in prison in 1977. Authorities ultimately concluded that Clark's confession regarding Elizabeth was a fabrication. The day after Elizabeth disappeared, police received a tip from a local auto dealer regarding a suspicious couple who had been staying in a motel behind the Gill family's home. The couple had been waiting for a part for their light tin 1965 Chevrolet pickup truck. They initially told the dealer they would remain in town for another week while waiting for the part. However, when it arrived on June 14th, the dealer discovered the couple had checked out early, leaving their disabled truck behind and disappearing without a trace. Police investigated the couple and discovered they had been using aliases and switching the license plates on their vehicles. They had been in Cape Girardeau for some time, selling purses door-to-door in the neighborhood. Multiple witnesses, including one of Elizabeth's sisters, reported seeing the woman from the motel talking to Elizabeth and attempting to lure her to her car. Another witness reported seeing the same couple purchasing clothes for a crying child who was calling for her mother. In 2010, 45 years after Elizabeth's disappearance, authorities publicly announced they were investigating the case as a non-family abduction. The purse-selling couple, whom police were never able to locate, are now considered the prime suspects in Elizabeth's disappearance. Investigators managed to trace the couple's vehicle back to the original dealership in Lake Orion, Michigan. They also traced the purses they sold back to their manufacturer, but they were unable to identify who had purchased them. Authorities are still seeking information on 2 other couples who had been staying in the motel behind the Gill residence before Elizabeth vanished. One of the unidentified men was described as being between 60 to 65 years old, a natty dresser, and drove a black and white 1965 Ford Thunderbird with 3 different sets of license plates: an Alabama plate numbered 38 to 19,438, a Virginia plate numbered a 25-1356, and possibly a Florida plate. His companion was an older Caucasian woman, described as 5 feet 1 inch and 150 pounds with white hair. The second woman was believed to be the daughter of the older woman and was described as 5 feet 2 inches with red hair. Her husband was a Caucasian male, approximately 6 feet 1 inch tall with a slender build. Authorities believe these individuals are likely deceased, but they hope that acquaintances or relatives might recognize their descriptions and provide leads. Elizabeth was the youngest of 10 children. At the time of her disappearance, she was being cared for by her older siblings while their mother accompanied their father to St. Louis, Missouri, where he worked. Elizabeth's father passed away in 1970, and 2 of her siblings have also died. However, her mother and 7 remaining brothers and sisters are still alive and continue to seek answers. Elizabeth may resemble one of her sisters, and authorities remain hopeful that new information may one day lead to closure in her case. Charles Arland Henderson was just 11 years old when he vanished without a trace on July 25, 1991, in Moscow Mills, Missouri, about 50 miles north of St. Louis. It was a warm summer evening when Arland set off on his white and yellow bicycle, riding around his family's mobile home park, a place he knew well. He was last seen between 5 o'clock and 5:30 p.m., pedaling away as dusk began to settle over the small rural town. But what should have been just another day of childhood adventure quickly turned into a nightmare. Arland never made it home. His mother, who had been raising him alone since his father's death from emphysema the year before, reported him missing when he failed to return. For months, there was no sign of him, no leads, no witnesses, nothing to explain how a young boy could simply vanish. Then, 3 months later, authorities made a chilling discovery. Arland's bicycle, abandoned in a bean field off North Ethlyn Road, 5 miles from his home. The bike had been carefully placed in a way that suggested someone had deliberately left it there rather than it being tossed aside or wrecked in an accident. Police collected it as evidence, and in a small but crucial detail, they found a set of fingerprints on its frame. Investigators hoped this clue would lead them to answers, but the case quickly turned cold. For years, Arland's disappearance remained a mystery, with little more than rumors and speculation to keep the case alive. Then, in 2001, 10 years after he vanished, a shocking confession surfaced. A man named Joshua Spangler came forward and claimed responsibility for Arland's murder. At the time of the alleged crime, Spangler had been just 13 years old, too young to serve time for homicide. But his story was horrifying. According to Spangler, he had been involved in drug activity in 1991, working for 2 older men, George and Charles Chucky Gibson, local figures in the drug trade. Spangler claimed that a member of Arland's family owed Charles Gibson money, and that he had been paid $10,000 to kill Arland as a warning. He alleged that on July 25, 1991, he and George Gibson abducted Arland and held him captive in a house in Davis, Missouri, for several days. On July 28, Spangler said he shot Arland in the head with a 9mm pistol near a creek bed in Davis, then buried his body along the Mississippi River. Authorities immediately launched an extensive search, hoping to finally bring closure to Arland's family. They focused on an area near Winfield, Missouri, scouring the ground for any trace of his remains. But nothing was found, no body, no evidence, nothing to support Spangler's gruesome tale. Then, in a bizarre turn of events, the case collapsed. The authorities discovered numerous discrepancies in Spangler's account, and his credibility crumbled under scrutiny. The charges against both Gibson brothers were dropped in October 2001, as investigators determined Spangler had fabricated the entire story. The motive? Spangler had been playing a sick joke, deliberately misleading the police to make them look incompetent. His confession was nothing more than a cruel, attention-seeking lie. For his false testimony, Spangler was charged with perjury and sentenced to 7 years in prison. At the time, he was already serving a 4-year sentence for unrelated charges of burglary and evidence tampering. With the case back to square one, authorities were left wondering, what really happened to Arland Henderson? Despite the dead end, investigators did not rule out the possibility that Arland's disappearance was drug-related. However, his mother vehemently denied any involvement with drugs, insisting that her son had simply been a happy, fun-loving boy with no ties to that world. He loved telling stories, swimming, and riding his bike. Social studies and science were his favorite subjects in school. In many ways, Arland was a typical child, navigating life in a small town with dreams far beyond the trailer park where he lived. But the lack of evidence and the passage of time made the case nearly impossible to solve. There were whispers that Arland's sister, Joy Henderson Leonard, and her husband, Robert Bob Leonard, might have known more about his disappearance than they ever admitted. Tragically, 10 years after Arland vanished, Joy was murdered, killed by her own husband, Robert, who then died by suicide. Only after their deaths did police learn that they had allegedly made statements indicating they knew something about Arland's case. But whatever secrets they carried died with them, leaving yet another unanswered question in an already baffling mystery. Then, in 2007, a new name surfaced in connection with Arland's case, Michael J. Devlin. Devlin had been arrested after authorities discovered two missing boys, Sean Hornbeck and Ben Ownby, living in captivity in his home. Sean had been missing for 4 years, abducted when he was just 11 years old in 2002. Ben had been taken in 2007, but was found alive just 5 days later. Their rescue was a miracle, and it sent shockwaves through Missouri as people wondered if Devlin could be responsible for other child abductions. A multi-jurisdictional task force was created to investigate whether Devlin was linked to Arland's disappearance, as well as to other missing children, including Scott Clee-Schultz, who vanished in 1988, and Bianca Piper, who disappeared in 2005. For a brief moment, it seemed like answers might finally be within reach. But once again, hope faded. After months of investigation, the task force found no evidence that Devlin had been involved in Arland's case, or in any other disappearances beyond the two boys he had been convicted of kidnapping. The investigation dissolved in October 2007, leaving Arland's family right back where they started, waiting for answers that never seemed to come. Despite the years that have passed, Arland's mother has never given up hope. She still lives in the same trailer park where she raised her son, though in a different mobile home. Angela Marie Hammond was just 20 years old when her life took an unimaginable turn on the night of April 4th, 1991. She was a vibrant young woman, for months pregnant, engaged to her high school sweetheart, and planning for a future filled with love and family. Born in Kansas City, Missouri, to parents Chris and Marcia, Angela had spent most of her life in Clinton, a quiet, rural town with a population of fewer than 9,000 people. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, a place where crime was rare. Angela, or Angie as she was affectionately called, was known for her infectious energy, her warm personality, and her ability to light up any room she walked into. She had a bright future ahead of her, studying at Central Missouri State University during the day and working as a bank clerk in the evenings. Her fiancé, Rob Schaefer, was a beloved high school football player with dreams of joining the military. The couple, young and in love, had recently learned they were expecting a child. Rob had quickly proposed, and Angela had happily accepted. They planned to rent an apartment together and build a life for their growing family. But all those dreams were stolen on a dark, silent night in Clinton when Angela made a simple phone call that would change everything. That evening, Angela and Rob had spent time at a barbecue with her family. Later, around 10 p.m., she drove Rob home so he could babysit his younger brother while his mother was out. They had planned to meet up again later, but as the night went on, Angela became tired and decided to head home instead. At around 11:15 p.m., she stopped at a payphone at the intersection of Jefferson and 2nd Street, about 7 blocks from Rob's house, to let him know she wouldn't be meeting him after all. As they spoke, Angela suddenly noticed something strange. A light green Ford pickup truck circling the empty parking lot nearby. At first, she didn't pay much attention to it, but as the truck continued to drive around and then parked a few feet away from her, a cold shiver ran down her spine. She described the driver to Rob as a dirty-looking man with a mustache, a beard, and glasses. He wore overalls and a dark baseball cap. The truck had an image on the back window that resembled a fish jumping out of the water. As she kept her eye on the man, she noticed something even stranger. He got out of his truck and stepped into the phone booth next to hers. He appeared to use the phone for a few moments before returning to his truck, where he took out a flashlight and began rummaging around inside, as if looking for something. Angela was uneasy, and Rob could hear it in her voice. He told her to ask the man if he wanted to use her phone, thinking maybe the other one was broken. Angela hesitated, but did as Rob suggested. The man declined and said he would try again in a minute. That was the moment Rob knew something wasn't right. He offered to come pick her up, but Angela, thinking she was just being paranoid, told him not to worry about it. They resumed their conversation. That was the last mistake she would ever make. Suddenly, without warning, Rob heard a terrifying scream through the receiver. Then silence. His heart pounded as he frantically shouted Angela's name, but the line had gone dead. Then, a chilling voice came through, low, calm, and calculated. I didn't need to use the phone anyway. And just like that, Angela was gone. Rob bolted out the door, jumped into his car, and sped towards the payphone, praying he would find Angela safe. As he raced through the streets, he saw a pickup truck matching the description Angela had given him just moments earlier. And then he heard a desperate, terrified scream from inside the vehicle. "Robbie! Robbie!" It was Angela. She was in the passenger seat of the truck, struggling against her abductor. Rob didn't hesitate. He immediately spun his car around and floored the gas, chasing after them. But as he made a sharp turn, his car's transmission suddenly failed. The engine sputtered, smoke billowed from the hood, and the vehicle slowed to a stop. In a horrifying moment of helplessness, Rob could do nothing but watch as the truck carrying Angela disappeared into the night. He jumped out and ran down the street, but it was useless. Angela was gone. Rob was frantic as he flagged down a passing car and begged the driver to take him to the police station. The Clinton Police Department was alerted to the abduction and wasted no time launching an investigation. Officers rushed to the payphone where Angela had been taken. Her car was still parked there, her purse and belongings inside. There were no signs of a struggle, no clues, no trail to follow. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together what had happened. Rob described the suspect and his truck, and police created a composite sketch. But the sketch turned out to be nearly useless, poorly drawn, and missing crucial details Angela had described. Days turned into weeks, and the case quickly became a nightmare for Angela's family and for Rob, who was drowning in guilt, haunted by the sound of her screams and the knowledge that he had come so close to saving her. The community of Clinton was in shock. Over 250 volunteers, along with police officers from 15 neighboring counties, joined in the search for Angela. They combed through forests, rivers, fields, and country roads, hoping to find any trace of her. But nothing was found, no evidence, no truck, no suspect. As days stretched into weeks with no new leads, suspicion began to fall on Rob himself. With no witnesses to corroborate his story and no physical evidence to support his claim, police wondered if he could have staged the entire thing. But after undergoing and passing a polygraph test, Rob was cleared of any involvement. Angela's ex-boyfriend, Bill Barker, was also questioned, but he, too, passed a polygraph and was ruled out as a suspect. With no real leads, investigators started looking into similar cases of missing women in Missouri. Just months before Angela vanished, a woman named Trudy Darby was abducted from a convenience store in Max Creek, Missouri. 2 days later, her body was found shot in the head. A month after that, another woman, Cheryl Kenny, disappeared from Nevada, Missouri, under eerily similar circumstances. Police feared a serial predator was on the loose, but no solid evidence linked the cases. In 2021, a shocking new theory emerged. A confidential informant came forward with a letter he had received on the very day of Angela's abduction. The letter threatened his family and specifically mentioned his daughter, who, coincidentally, was also named Angela and bore a striking resemblance to Angela Hammond. The letter suggested that the abduction may have been a case of mistaken identity. If true, Angela Hammond was not the intended target. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But despite this new theory, Angela's case remains unsolved. Her mother, Marcia, never gave up hope of finding answers. But tragically, she passed away in 2021, never knowing what happened to her daughter. Rob, forever haunted by that night, eventually moved away, started a family, and tried to move on, but he never stopped wondering what happened to Angela. More than 3 decades later, Angela Hammond is still missing, her case frozen in time. The mystery of what happened to her that night remains one of the most haunting unsolved disappearances in Missouri's history. On the evening of October 9, 1976, Teresa Gosage and Alfred Hoffman Marshall, both students at Waynesville High School and the children of officers stationed at Fort Leonard Wood Army Base, left for a date. The couple departed at approximately 7:30 p.m. in Alfred's car, with no indication that anything was amiss. Neither Teresa nor Alfred returned home that night, and they have never been heard from again. The following day, Their vehicle was found abandoned on a secluded road within the confines of Fort Leonard Wood. The car was locked, and there were no immediate signs of foul play. However, investigators noted some unusual details. Despite the freezing temperatures, Alfred's jacket was left in the back seat, and his hairbrush, which he was known to always carry, remained in the center console. Despite these puzzling clues, authorities initially considered the possibility that the teenagers had run away together. However, family members and friends of both Teresa and Alfred quickly refuted the runaway theory. Teresa was a dedicated student, actively involved in her school's band. Just before her disappearance, the band had won a district competition and was preparing for a state-level contest, something she was reportedly very excited about. Her family and peers maintain that she had no reason to abandon her life, reinforcing the belief that something sinister had occurred. A few months later, in January 1977, a horrifying crime rocked Fort Leonard Wood. 3 teenagers, also out on a date, were brutally murdered. The perpetrator, Johnny Lee Thornton, was a military police officer who had pulled the victims over as they entered the base. He shot both boys to death before sexually assaulting and shooting the 2 girls. Miraculously, one of the young women survived the attack by playing dead. She later managed to walk 6 miles to the nearest house to call for help. Thornton was later arrested and charged with the murders. During his trial, he attempted to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming to suffer from multiple personality disorder. However, the court convicted him, sentencing him to 3 life terms plus an additional 20 years in prison. Investigators began to scrutinize his potential connection to the disappearances of Alfred and Teresa, given that Alfred's abandoned car was found not far from where the murdered teenagers' bodies had been dumped. Despite these disturbing parallels, no concrete evidence has ever surfaced to link Thornton definitively to Alfred and Teresa's case. Authorities have continued to investigate other possibilities, but after nearly 5 decades, their disappearances remain a haunting mystery. The lack of physical evidence, witness accounts, or further leads has left both families in a perpetual state of grief and uncertainty. Teresa and Alfred's families, as well as the military and local law enforcement, continue to seek answers. The U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command remains the leading agency on the case, urging anyone with information to come forward. Though decades have passed, the question remains: what happened to Teresa Gosage and Alfred Hoffman Marshall on that fateful October night in 1976? Until new evidence or a confession emerges, the case remains one of the enduring mysteries of Fort Leonard Wood.